I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and I was lied to.
That's a pretty negative way to start the video, Omni.
I'm aware of that, Snazzy, but I know what I'm doing. Upon hearing me say that, I'm sure quite a few of you made some assumptions about what kind of video this would be. However, if you let your assumptions color your expectations, you just might miss out on something. Before I elaborate on that statement, though, I need to provide a bit of backstory on today's subject.
Back in the 1960s, Toho was dominating the box office with kaiju both domestically and abroad. Daiei Studios wanted a piece of that action and decided to enter the realm of Kaiju Eiga with an ambitious project sure to not only be different from the Godzilla series, but maybe even top it. That project was entitled Giant Horde Beast Nezura, a tale in which a plague of supersized rats descend upon Tokyo. Live rats were wrangled for the production and a good amount of footage was shot. Working with live animals was challenging, though, and the production was ultimately shut down due to public concerns of the rats escaping and spreading disease. Not only that, but after the production was shut down, the rats were burned to death rather than released back into the wild. Despite the failure, Daiei would eventually embrace turtle power instead, and the rest is history. Giant Horde Beast Nezura simply became a footnote, never to be revisited by Daiei again.
Naturally, this film caught the attention of the folks at 3Y Company, who had recently made a name for themselves with the half-sequel, half-remake, half-meta-commentary film The Great Buddha Arrival. So this failed production became the basis for their next major film, Nezura 1964.
From a movie that disappeared to a movie that never was. Seems like the logical next step to me.
True, Snazzy, but given that Great Buddha was too metafictional for its own good, I must admit I was a little hesitant going into this one. Still, it deserved a fair shot, so I sat down to watch it and see how it would turn out.
That's certainly fair. So what's the plot?
Oh, that's already done. Remember all that stuff I said about the production for Giant Horde Beast Nezura like 2 minutes ago? That's the plot of the movie.
It is?
Yep.
But what about the DVD cover? Or the plot synopsis that SRS Cinema released implying that there's more to the story that involves a real monster?
That's why I opened the video by saying I was lied to. I cannot stress this point enough, folks. Nezura 1964 is not a kaiju movie.
If you're looking for something like Godzilla, Gamera, or King Kong, look elsewhere. Nezura 1964 is not Kaiju Eiga, nor is it even science fiction or horror. Rather, this is a historical biopic. It has more in common with movies like Yankee Doodle Dandy or documentaries like Jodorowsky's Dune than it does with Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster or Food of the Gods.
It is about kaiju in as much as the characters are working on a kaiju movie, but that's it.
There's no sudden twist ending where a real Nezura shows up, and it's not set in a world where kaiju work as actors a la Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The horrifying beast who graces the DVD cover is technically in the movie, but he barely has a full minute of screen time, and that's predominantly comprised of brief glimpses and scenes from the doomed production. This cover, combined with the plot description on the back, is so misleading that it borders on false advertising.
So I repeat, Nezura 1964 is not a kaiju movie. Period. Okay, now that we've established what this movie is not, I would like to remind you all not to let your assumptions color your expectations. You see, even though Nezura 1964 is not the kaiju movie which this cover art promises, it's still really good.
As I'm sure you've noticed, there are some familiar faces in here from The Great Buddha Arrival. Of course, we have Yukijiro Hotaru, who's become a sort of go-to star for these projects, playing Daiei CEO Yuichi Nagano. Masanori Kikuzawa, who played Yoshiro Edamasa in Great Buddha, is cast here as special effects director Yonejiro Tsukaji, a fictionalized version of the real-life Yonesuburo Tsukiji. And finally, Murata's actor Kazuma Yoneyama plays assistant director Kazuaki Yukawa.
Now these characters are all real people from history. Kinda. And even though the actors aren't necessarily physical matches for them, they still do a good job embodying those characters' personalities.
All of the characters are played with respect. Unlike other biopics I've seen, no one is made into an arbitrary villain for the sake of introducing conflict. Even the protesters who get the movie shut down have a legitimate reason for doing so. They're not opposed to cinema as an art form or kaiju eiga as a genre, they just don't want the rats to spread disease in the neighborhood. That's perfectly understandable.
Like any non-fiction historical biopic, however, some liberties are taken. The first of these is the framing device used for the visuals.
Nezura 1964 is presented as a type of behind-the-scenes film, with Yukawa carrying a handheld camera around to document the film's production. This adds some visual interest to the film, making the proceedings feel a bit more organic rather than staged. Granted, there are plenty of scenes where the movie cheats a little with this format, but as framing devices go, it gets the job done.
Other liberties include scenes that are likely inspired by real events, but which probably didn't happen as depicted.
For example, Tsukaji and Yukawa are shown at one point watching a TV broadcast in which two people discuss how television has taken off so much as a medium that it may very well kill movie theaters. Likely a real concern among film industry alumni at the time, but doubtful a scene like that happened in real life.
That's right, everyone. People were having that same conversation before streaming channels were even a concept. Knowing how that worked out in the long run is why we always believed theaters would survive the lockdown. Which they did.
Surprisingly, there's a liberty taken within the plot of the original Nezura movie.
According to every source I've seen, the original film would have featured the swarm of regular rats as well as a variant that could fly, sometimes called Nezubato. Not every source says that the mutated giant mammoth Nezura would have appeared, but the modern movie chooses to include it anyway while making no mention of the flying rodents.
Speaking of which, what about the mammoth Nezura? I know it doesn't actually do much, but shouldn't you say something about it anyway?
I suppose I could. It is in the film, after all.
The mammoth Nezura, which I guess you could say is the mascot of this project, is a proper kaiju as opposed to a normal animal on a scale set, and it's got a neat design. It takes the base of a rat and makes it strange and grotesque by adding tusks, membranous spines, and odd proportions.
Even though it's achieved through motion capture and CGI, much like Shin Godzilla, it looks and feels like suitmation for the few fleeting seconds we see it.
Sure, a part of me wishes this creature had been the focus of a proper kaiju movie, but again, that doesn't mean I'm disappointed.
Getting back on track with the liberties taken, we also have something that feels out of place within the story.
The film opens in color with the burning of the rats after the production is shut down, and as the fire rises, Nagano suddenly panics as he has a vision of Mammoth Nezura in the rising flames. When we see the same scene later in black and white, Nagano still has that panic attack, but the spectral monster is not seen and the fire is not nearly as large.
I'm pretty sure that didn't happen in real life, and it's never followed up on, which raises the question of why it's there to begin with.
At first, it seems like it's setting up the film to go in a more fantastical direction, but as stated, that doesn't happen, and there's nothing else to suggest that Nagano has any kind of psychological issues. In fact, given how invested Tsukaji is in the project, and since it's clear that he doesn't want to kill the rats in such a cruel manner, I think it would have made more sense if he had this vision instead.
Well, he does get an appropriate reaction later.
After everything is shut down, Tsukaji is shown standing beside a city set, and once he's alone, all of the emotions he was bottling up come out as he smashes one of the buildings with his bare hands.
It's the only time anything like that happens in the film, and given the context, it's the most appropriate time for it to happen. That's the emotional catharsis.
Very true, Snazzy, very true. However, I don't think we want to give the audience the wrong impression.
What do you mean? We already explained to the audience that this isn't a traditional kaiju movie.
Yes, but since Nezura 1964 is about a failed production, that might lead some people to think it's a pessimistic film. But that's not the case. When the production fails, it's true that there is some initial disappointment. There always is.
When you pour your time, effort, and resources into a project that goes nowhere, it's very disheartening. Heck, this example is only made worse by having to incinerate the rats. They were innocents in this whole thing, and they wound up dying for nothing.
Despite all of this, though, the film does not end on a dour note. It's actually quite optimistic.
Yonayama gets the positivity train rolling by noting how, even though everyone is upset and disheartened, he personally took the whole thing as a learning experience. He now feels that he has a better understanding of how to make a film, and he'll remember these lessons in the future. Then, of course, Nagano gets the inspiration for Gamera, who becomes Daiei's signature kaiju in the days to come, and we all know how that worked out. Even Tsukiji is shown to have turned out alright after working on Gamera.
You could say this film depicts the most literal example of how the best laid plans of mice and men can go awry. But when that happens, the best thing you can do is just pick yourself back up and move on to whatever comes next. It's a darn good lesson, especially for any aspiring entertainers out there.
You know, something's been bugging me this whole time. Why is the real-life Tsukiji portrayed by a fictional character named Tsukaji while the other characters aren't?
That's a very good question, Snazzy.
I agree. You don't know the answer, do you?
Nope, but in the end, that anomaly doesn't have a negative effect on the film.
You know, I think I liked Nezura 1964 more than The Great Buddha Arrival. That movie has some good stuff in it, but it got so caught up in being postmodern that it completely lost the plot by the end. Nezura, meanwhile, stays grounded in the reality of the events which inspired it, and by extension provides inspiration of its own. For fans of Kaiju Eiga, this serves as a fascinating glimpse into an oft-overlooked part of the genre's history, and for people who appreciate the craft of making these films, it's quite a treat.
The misleading cover art isn't the movie's fault, so don't be dissuaded. I think Nezura 1964 would make a good addition to any Kaiju fan's movie collection. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Actually, the majority of this film is set in 1963 rather than 1964, as the title suggests. That misleading aspect is the responsibility of the filmmakers, but at that point I'd just be nitpicking if I drew too much attention to it.
Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books, Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.